That morning, the air felt unusually heavy. Behind my window, gray clouds gathered as if preparing to bring bad news rather than rain. On my kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming slowly. And right next to it, the envelope that had arrived in the mail the night before. The envelope was not ordinary, thick, sturdy paper, with a gold-embossed law firm seal in the corner, and on it, my name written in cold typewriter font, Selina Turner. There was an odd resistance inside me to open it. Sometimes you know something is bad, but you still try to close your eyes and ignore it. That's how it was. But eventually, my fingers trembled as they tore open the edge of the envelope. The single sheet that came out was short but heavy, and those words were the beginning of something that would change my entire life. Mrs. Turner, please come to our office as soon as possible to discuss the assets that have been transferred to you. Harper & Lewis Law Firm. At that moment, I understood. This was the resurrection of a story I thought I had buried in the past. After receiving that letter, I didn't call the office for 3 whole days. Every morning, while drinking my coffee, I reread the envelope. It was as if the lines whispered a different threat to me each time. But eventually, I faced my fear. I picked up the phone, called, and the secretary scheduled an appointment for tomorrow morning at 10:30. The next morning came, and it was raining lightly. The stone pavements in the old part of town were wet and slippery. A black brass sign reading Harper & Lewis hung next to the heavy oak door. I pushed the door open. The interior was dim and warm, in contrast to the gray weather outside. Dark red carpets, brass-framed photographs, and old law books on the shelves. The woman at the reception desk greeted me with a smile. "Mrs. Turner, please come in. Mr. Lewis is waiting for you." As I walked down the corridor, my footsteps were muffled by the carpet. When the door opened, the heavy scent of oak wafted out, and sitting behind the desk was a man in a gray suit. He looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Turner," he said, smiling slightly, "it took you a while to find us." "Why did you call me here?" I asked, sitting down. The man pulled another envelope from his desk drawer. This one was even thicker, and he pushed it toward me on the table. "This is the official document of a trust left for you. But before we continue, there are some truths you need to know." My heart began to race. A voice inside me said this wasn't just about money or an inheritance, something else, something darker. My fingers traced the edge of the thick envelope on the table. The paper fibers were stiff, as if they carried the weight of years. But before opening it, Mr. Lewis leaned back slightly in his chair. He took off his glasses and placed them on the table. That look, it wasn't the look of a lawyer. It was more like the look of a doctor trying to deliver bad news politely. "Mrs. Turner," he said slowly, "this trust was kept solely for you, but I'm not sure if you want to know what's inside." "I'm here now," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "Whatever it is, tell me." The man pulled 3 pieces of paper from the envelope. The first was a yellowed letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. My eyes fixed on the lines. It was my father's handwriting. But my father had died 12 years ago. The letter began with these words, "My daughter, by the time you read these lines, I will no longer be here. The only thing I can leave you is the truth itself." My throat went dry. I reached for the second document. This time it was an old photograph, black and white with frayed edges. In the photo, a young woman was holding a newborn baby in her arms. The woman's eyes, they sent a chill down my spine, the same eyes that looked back at me every morning in the mirror. "Who is this?" I asked. Mr. Lewis remained silent for a moment, then said, "Your biological mother." At that moment, the rain pounding against the windows grew even harder. My ears rang. My father had never told me. And that was just the beginning. I picked up the third document. This time it was a bank statement. A large transfer had been made from an overseas account. Recipient, Ethan Turner. Date, last month. "What does this mean?" I asked. Mr. Lewis's voice lowered even further. "Miss Turner, someone is trying very hard to find you, and that person could be your mother." When I left the office, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. The documents in my hand felt heavy, as if they might slip from my grasp. I took a few steps, then stopped. A strange feeling inside me, as if someone was watching me. I turned my head slightly to the right. Across the street, a man in a black hoodie stood with his hands in his pockets, not looking at me. But his eyes, I could feel them. Even though I couldn't see his face, his gaze pierced my back. I turned the corner quickly. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I held the envelope tighter in my hand. I entered a cafe and sat down at a table in the corner. I ordered a steaming cup of coffee, but my mind was elsewhere. I took out the documents again. The photo, the letter, the bank statement. Everything was connected, but there were missing pieces, and I was determined to track down those missing pieces. I opened my phone and sent Emily a message. "Honey, I might have to be out of town for a few days. Please be careful." At that moment, the cafe door opened. The man in the black hoodie walked in. He headed straight for the cash register, but his eyes met mine for a moment. That look, icy, as if he were saying, "I know." I left my coffee half finished and went out the back door. I knew now. This wasn't just a matter of learning about my past. This was turning into a struggle for survival. When I stepped out into the back alley, the air was heavy with silence. The sidewalk stones were still wet from the rain. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence. I took a few steps. Behind me, I heard the door close. I didn't need to turn around. I knew. He was there too. I could hear his footsteps, slow, steady, the pace of a hunter tracking its prey without tiring it. I turned the corner and hurried toward where the car was parked, but the footsteps quickened too. My breathing was becoming labored. Just as I was about to reach the car, a firm hand touched my shoulder. I turned around reflexively. In front of me stood a man in his 40s, his hood pulled down, his features harsh, his eyes deep and cold, as if he hadn't been surprised by anything, hadn't been afraid of anything in years. You're Eleanor, aren't you?" he said in a low but sharp voice. I didn't answer. I only reached for my bag, gripping the documents tighter. "You should stop doing this," he said. "What should I stop doing?" I asked, my voice trembling involuntarily. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. On the contrary, it felt threatening. "Everything you know could kill you." His words hung in the air. I took a step back, but he moved closer. The distance between us narrowed until I could feel his breath. At that moment, a car honked its horn behind us. The man turned his attention there for a moment, and I seized the opportunity to jump into the car and lock the doors. As I started the engine, I looked in the mirror. He was still there. But this time he wasn't smiling. He looked at me as if to say, "This is only the beginning." I didn't go home that night. I stayed in a small motel outside the city, in a room with no number. When I looked out the window, the rain was flickering the light of the neon signs. There was only one question in my mind. Who was that man? I turned on my phone. The internet connection was weak, but sufficient. I searched for the name on the bank statement in the documents. Ethan Turner. The results were scarce, but one caught my attention. A yellowed newspaper clipping from 20 years ago. Headline, "Another name in the underground trade investigation." Below it, a black and white photo of a young man. His eyes were familiar. It was the younger version of the man who had stopped me on the street. The article stated that Ethan Turner's name had come up in an investigation involving international illegal cash transfers and missing persons who couldn't be located. But the case had been closed, the file shelved. I placed my hand on the documents. My father's letter, my mother's photo, the bank statement, all of them were somehow connected to this man named Ethan. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the hotel room door. It was so soft that I thought it might be the wind. But with the second knock, my heart began to race. I quietly picked up the small knife on the edge of the table. I approached the door. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. But on the floor, there was a thin envelope pushed under the door. I bent down and picked it up. There was only one word written on it: stop. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of Emily taken as she left school. Her back was turned, but I knew it was her. In that moment, I understood. This was no longer about my past. This was a battle for my daughter's future. With the photo in my hand, the knot in my throat made it hard to breathe. Even though Emily's back was turned, I immediately recognized her messy ponytail and the navy blue bag on her shoulder. And the scariest part, the photo was very recent. It had been taken on that rainy day. I looked inside the envelope again. There was a small folded note. I opened it. The handwriting was irregular, as if written in a hurry. "Stop digging into the matter, or you'll be next." At that moment, my entire body heated up. Fear, mixed with anger. My palms sweated. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I immediately grabbed my phone and called Emily. She answered on the third ring. "Mom?" Hearing her voice was somewhat reassuring, but her panic was evident. "Emily, where are you right now?" "I just left the tutoring center. I'm on my way home." "Stop. Stay there. I'm coming." I jumped into the car. The rain started again on the way. As the headlights scattered on the wet asphalt, every shadow in front of me looked threatening. When I found Emily, she was waiting at the corner cafe. She thought she was safe, but I knew none of us were safe anymore. I told her a small part of the truth. Without going into too much detail, I said, "Someone is trying to reach me, and they may use you." Her eyes widened. "So what are we going to do?" I took a deep breath. "We're not going to stay on the defensive anymore, Emily. Now we're going to make a move." When I took Emily home, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gloomy. The sky hung over us like a rusty gray blanket. I locked the door. I drew the curtains. No one should see us now. We sat down at the kitchen table. In the middle was a half-drunk cup of coffee, a plate with half-eaten cookies, but neither of us had an appetite. When I sat down, Emily was still looking at me. "Mom, who are these people?" I didn't look away from her. "Emily, these people are capable of destroying lives for their own gain, and we are the obstacle in their way." I brought my laptop to the table. As soon as the screen lit up, I navigated through the file folders, the documents, emails, and screenshots I'd been collecting for years. They all waited silently. I opened a folder, title, Ironclad. This was the code name for the encrypted documents Robert had left me before his death. At the time, I hadn't understood why it was so important, but now I knew. Emily furrowed her brows. "What are these?" "These," I said slowly, "will finish them off." I explained my plan. First, we would make copies of the documents. Then, we would collect every single digital crumb they left behind while trying to track them down. And at the right time, in the right place, we would expose everything. The fear in Emily's eyes slowly turned into something else. Determination. "Well, what do I do?" she asked. At that moment, I realized that she was no longer a child, but someone who was ready for battle. The next morning, the sun had not yet risen. The house was still dark, but the table in the kitchen had become our battle table. On it were laptops, notebooks, old newspaper clippings, and encrypted documents. And in the middle, a thermos full of coffee that Emily had brought. It was 5:12 a.m. We were about to make our first move. Emily's computer skills were better than mine. As the codes flashed across the screen, I was extracting coordinates and names from the old documents. At the center of everything was a single name, Ethan Turner. Our goal was to find out where he was, and if we were lucky, we would reach him before he reached us. Emily suddenly looked up. I found it. On the screen was a record of a private charter flight from last week. Ethan Turner's name was on the passenger list. Destination, Baltimore. I paused for a moment. Baltimore was a city that frequently appeared in my father's past, so this was leading back to the roots. Just then, a message came in from an unknown number on my phone. One word, "Don't." I showed the screen to Emily. "So they're aware," she said. I nodded. "Yes, and that means we're on the right track." The train heading to Baltimore was swaying along the tracks in the gray light of dawn. In my seat by the window, Emily pretended to be asleep, but she never took her hand out of her coat pocket. There was a small black recording device in that pocket, and if necessary, other things too. When the city's silhouette appeared on the horizon, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. This was the place where my father's name was whispered, where his old enemies still lived. And now I was about to set foot in their domain. When we exited the station, the air was crisp and cold. Baltimore's old brick buildings looked even more gloomy under the gray clouds. Narrow streets, rusty fire escapes, men standing silently on street corners. Being a stranger here was dangerous. Emily and I made eye contact. We started walking without speaking. The address was clear. A dilapidated building on the rundown part of Lombard Street, with a crumbling facade and no sign. As we approached the door, muffled music could be heard from inside. Just as I was about to touch the door, a shadow appeared behind us. A tall man in a dark coat. "The person you're looking for may not be inside," he said. His voice was neither threatening nor friendly, but his eyes, it was as if he had been watching our every move for weeks. Emily leaned toward me slightly. "I think they've already started," she whispered. I took a deep breath. "Then," I said, pushing the door open, Welcome to the lion's den. The door creaked open heavily. Inside, the suffocating smell of tobacco smoke clung to the walls. In the dim light, 3 men leaning against a long bar turned their heads toward us. Some looked surprised, some mocking, and some dangerous. Emily walked half a step ahead of me. The old photographs hanging on the white walls seemed to be judging us. The gray-haired, heavy-set man sitting at the table in the middle caught my attention. There was a familiar expression on his face. He must have been one of my father's former business partners. "Guests from afar," he said. His voice was heavy, the words falling from his throat like stones. "Do you know me?" I asked. He smiled. "I know who you are, and why you're here." At that moment, the door behind us closed silently. Our connection to the outside world was severed. The adrenaline surged through me. Emily sat down at the end of the table and placed her bag beside her. "Let's not waste time," she said. "Give us Robert Kane's files." The man leaned back in his chair. "Robert Kane," he said slowly. "His work isn't easily forgotten, but you might want to forget." At that moment, someone else emerged from the back. He was young, slender, but his eyes had a steely expression. He was holding a small metal box in his hand. He placed the box on the table, and he looked at me. "If you want this, you'll have to prove something first." At that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about getting information. Even getting out of this room alive would be a test. The metal surface of the box emitted a cold glow in the dim light. The man, whose hands were slender yet strong, opened the lid. Inside were a few yellowed file pages, a USB drive, and a small black pistol. "You'll have to choose," he said. "Either take the gun or the USB drive, but only one will leave here with you." Emily stood up beside me. "Is this a game?" she asked. The man smiled. "No. This is the moment when you choose who to trust." Me. At that moment, the gaze of everyone in the room locked on me. My breathing slowed down. 2 voices were fighting in my head. One saying, "Take the gun and stay alive." The other said, "Take the USB and get to the truth." I reached out my hand to the box. My fingers ran over the cold surface of the metal, and then I took the USB. The silence in the room continued for a while. The gray-haired man nodded. "So you still have faith," he said. "The gun could have saved you today. But the USB, maybe it will save tomorrow." I put the USB in my pocket. The tense expression on Emily's face gave way to a glimmer of hope. We were about to leave when the door closed again. The young man stepped in front of us. "The test is not over," he said. "Now you must learn to protect this information." As the door closed, the air inside grew heavy. The young man's eyes fell on the USB in my pocket. He took a slow step towards me, the scuff of his shoe on the floor echoing through the room. "Give it to me," he said. His voice was soft, but there was a steely hardness underneath. Emily stood in front of me. "We won't let you do this," she said, her voice firm even as it trembled. Adam pulled a pistol with a silencer from his belt. He slowed for a moment. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. My eye shifted to the fire alarm by the door. I took a step back. I gently moved my hand to the pen in my pocket. There was a small steel tip on the end of the pen. I hit the glass of the alarm. The sound of the shattering shattered the silence of the room. Immediately, a shrill siren sounded. Red lights started flashing. The young man swore. Emily pulled me by the arm. "Run!" she shouted. Our footsteps echoed on the metal floor. The shouting and confusion from behind was enough to increase our speed. When we turned a corner, 2 security guards appeared in front of us. One was talking into a walkie-talkie. The other reached for his gun. There was a narrow maintenance tunnel in the wall next to us. Emily said, "There." It was a narrow, dark, dusty passage. All we could hear was the sound of our breathing and a distant alarm. At the end of the tunnel, we found a rusty hatch. I pushed. It didn't move. Emily leaned her shoulder against the hatch. We pushed it together. 1 moment, 2 moments. Then the hatch opened and the cold night air hit us in the face. When we stepped outside, the lights of the city stretched out before us, but we were not yet safe. As the hatch closed again behind us, a shadow appeared. The young man had found us. The young man was clinging to the edge of the hatch, looking at us. He had what looked like a smile on his face, but was actually a threatening expression. He raised a gun with a silencer. Me and Emily started running at the same time. The back streets of Baltimore were narrow, dark, and labyrinthine. The rain-soaked stone roads felt like a slippery trap under our feet. The footsteps behind me were clear. The man was fast. I could tell he was a professional with every step. Rounding a corner, a broken neon sign flashed on our left, Harbor Storage. I pulled Emily by the arm and we ran towards the warehouse. It smelled damp and heavy inside. The shelves were full of dusty boxes. As I passed between them, my hand hit the edge of a shelf. A box fell to the floor and toppled over with a loud thud. The sound echoed. The man's footsteps came closer. Emily whispered, "Mum, we can keep him busy here." I shook my head. "No, we need to get out. USB can't stay here." We found the back exit door, but it was locked with a chain. I looked around. There was a rusty iron pipe on top of the shelf. I picked it up and hit the chain. The first blow was not enough. The second blow broke the chain. The moment we opened the door, the cold wind hit us in the face. The street lamps were blinking. But as soon as we stepped outside, a gunshot rang out. The bullet lodged in the wall next to me. Emily bit her lip to keep from screaming. And we kept running. As the cold wind cut my face, our steps were getting heavier and heavier. My heart was pounding out of my chest. My lungs were burning. But the footsteps behind us were still there. He wasn't slowing down at all. Suddenly, I saw a narrow alleyway on the right. I directed Emily there. The alleyway was an alley wedged between two buildings, full of rubbish, with only one flashing light. As I was speeding along, my shoe slipped into a pothole full of water. The icy water splashed up to my trouser leg. At the end of the alley was a high wire fence, rusty razor wire on it, but there was no other exit. Emily looked at me. There was fear and determination in her eyes at the same time. "Up," I said. She began to climb, holding onto the gaps in the wire with her hands. Just then, we heard footsteps behind us. When I turned around, the man had appeared at the top of the passageway. He pointed his gun at us. I reflexively ducked down and knocked over the trash can in front of me. The metal clattered as it rolled away, and the man lost his balance for a moment. I took advantage of that moment and climbed halfway up the fence. Emily had already crossed to the other side. She reached out her hand and shouted, "Hurry!" I kept climbing, my hands cutting into the rusty edges of the wire. Just as I reached the top of the fence, a bullet exploded behind me. The bullet struck the metal wire right next to my right shoulder. Sparks flew before my eyes. When I jumped to the other side of the fence, I landed hard on the ground. We were out of breath but alive. Emily's face was as white as a sheet. "We can't rely on such luck again," she said. She was right, because I could feel it. This chase wasn't over yet. We made our way through Baltimore's back alleys and reached a small apartment building Emily had never mentioned before. From the outside, the building looked abandoned. Peeling plaster, cracked windows, but Emily opened the back door with an old key she pulled from her pocket. When we entered, we were greeted by dim light and the smell of old wood. We climbed the stairs to the third floor. Behind the door was a tiny apartment. In one corner was an old sofa, in the other, a rusty kitchen sink. But most importantly, it was a place no one knew about. Emily locked the door and drew the curtains over the window. Then she placed a small first aid kit on the table. "Your hand is cut," she said. "I noticed the blood on my palms." The rust and thorns of the barbed wire had torn my skin. Emily quietly cleaned the wounds. When I looked at her, there was not only fatigue, but also a deep determination on her face. There was a moment of silence. Then I took the USB drive out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "Did we win?" I asked. Emily shook her head. "No, this is just opening the door. The real battle is just beginning." There was a small, faded label on the USB drive. Project Revenant. I had never heard that name before, but I had a feeling this file would reveal the true cause of my father's death and Ethan Turner's dark secrets. Emily took a deep breath. "We're heading to Washington tomorrow morning. The answers are there," I nodded. But I knew the road to Washington might be far more dangerous than what Wed experienced that night. When we arrived in Washington, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. We tried to blend into the crowd as we left Union Station. Emily clutched her bag tightly, still containing that damn USB stick. We took the subway and headed north. Our destination was a small building that looked like an ordinary library from the outside, but Emily said it wasn't an official library. When we entered, an old man greeted us. He had a sharp gaze behind his glasses. He nodded slightly to Emily, then looked me over. "So this is him," he said, as if he knew everything about me. We went into the back room. After the door closed, Emily placed the USB drive on the table. The man pulled out an old laptop and began opening the files. Black and white documents and scanned photos appeared on the screen. Some showed my father when he was young. Others showed Ethan Turner shaking hands with people, smiling. But what really caught my attention was a document titled Project Revenant. As I read it, my stomach started to churn. This project was related to illegal experiments and arms trafficking, and my father had been unwittingly drawn into it. A plan had been made to silence him. Emily looked at me. These documents could destroy Ethan, but if we publish them, it won't just be him. Much greater powers will come after us. The old man took off his glasses. "You must decide," he said, "to reveal this to the world or to remain silent. Either choice will change your life forever." At that moment, I understood. It was a turning point not only for my father, but also for myself. The documents on the screen were right in front of me, as if they were engraved in my eyes. Every line that mentioned my father's name stabbed my heart like a knife. On one side was justice, on the other, survival. Emily was sitting at the other end of the table. Her hands clasped, she was looking at me. There was both fear and hope in her eyes. The old man was silent. The only sound in the room was the slow hum of the computer fan. "Mom," Emily said, "if we publish this, there's no going back. They'll try to kill us, but if we don't, they'll keep winning." My fingers trembled as I took the USB drive in my hand, a tiny piece of plastic, but it held the power to change my life. I looked up at Emily. My father chose not to stay silent, and that's why he died. I won't stay silent either. Emily took a deep breath, a tear rolling down her cheek. The old man nodded, quickly typing a few keys on the computer keyboard. The documents began spreading across the world through encrypted channels. In that moment, I felt both a sense of relief and an indescribable fear. Because I knew Ethan Turner was no longer just an enemy. He wouldn't stop until he found me. Emily gently touched my shoulder. "The time for hiding is over," she said. "Now it's time to fight." And for the first time, I truly felt ready. When the documents were published, it felt like an invisible weight had been lifted from the room. But that feeling lasted only a few seconds. Warnings suddenly appeared on the old man's computer screen, unauthorized access attempts to the servers. The IP addresses were constantly changing. "They've noticed us," the man said, his voice cold and certain. Emily ran to the window and gently parted the curtain. A black SUV was parked at the corner of the street. The engine was running. 2 men in the front seat were staring at the building without moving. My heart began to race. Not even 10 minutes had passed. Ethan Turner's hand was very fast. The old man shut down the computer and handed me the USB drive. "This is your responsibility now," he said, "because wherever you go from here, they will follow you." Emily came over to me and whispered, "We need to get out of here right away. Is there a back exit?" The man nodded, leading us through a narrow corridor to a small back door. When we stepped outside, it had started raining. The streetlights were blurry, and every shadow looked like a threat. As we ran through the dark alleys, my phone vibrated. An unknown number on the screen, I answered. "Selena," said a familiar voice. It was Ethan Turner. His voice was calm, but every word was as cold as ice. "You played well, but this game has only just begun." The call ended. I looked into Emily's eyes. I didn't know if it was from the rain or fear, but we were trembling. In that moment, I realized this story wouldn't have an ending, at least not yet, because we hadn't just uncovered a truth. We'd also opened the door to a much larger war. The sound of the rain had swallowed the city's chaos. Emily and I were catching our breath under the roof of an abandoned train station. Our eyes were fixed on every shadow moving in the darkness. The USB in my hand felt like a warm stone in my palm. Small, but powerful enough to change the world. My father's face appeared in my mind. To complete his unfinished struggle had become my sole purpose. In the distance, a single light appeared on the train tracks, a freight train slicing through the night, slowly approaching. Emily whispered, "There is our way out, but deep down I knew this was just an escape from the city. There was no place where we would truly be safe." We jumped on the train, the cold metal surface slippery beneath our shoes. As the rain hit our faces, I turned back and looked at the city. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. There was an unknown number on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. A familiar voice came out of the silence. Ethan Turner. His voice was low, his words as cold as ice. Nice move, Selena, but we're only in the first act of the play. As the line went dead, the city's lights faded into the mist in the distance. I would return one day. But when that day came, I would no longer be the one fleeing, I would be the one chasing.